The hallway outside room 2141 of the Rayburn House office building was unusually quiet that morning. Not the kind of quiet that comes from lack of activity, but the heavy, loaded silence of anticipation. Everyone in Washington knew what was about to happen. Justice Samuel Alito, the second most senior member of the United States Supreme Court, had, grudgingly, agreed to testify before the House Oversight Committee. And that alone was enough to fill every inch of hallway air with tension. Reporters whispered into phones. Interns clutched folders a little tighter. Even the marble walls seemed to echo with a kind of ceremonial unease. This wasn't just another hearing. This was a reckoning, one that Alito, for all his robes and rhetoric, couldn't control. Inside the hearing room, the long stretch of polished mahogany shimmered beneath the soft lights. Lawmakers trickled in, taking their seats with varying degrees of excitement and dread. Alito was already there, seated stiffly at the witness table, hands clasped, jaw tight, eyes scanning the room not with curiosity, but with contempt. He didn't want to be here. That much was clear. 3 chairs down sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, calm, unshaken, slowly flipping through a leather-bound notebook, occasionally pausing to underline something. She didn't look nervous. She looked prepared, like someone who'd already run the scenario 10 different ways and was now just waiting for her cue. Born in Tyler, Texas, raised by public school teachers, a trial lawyer turned legislator, and in a few moments the woman Justice Alito would wish he hadn't underestimated. The chairman tapped the gavel. Cameras locked into place. The sessions was called to order. We're here today to address growing concerns over judicial ethics and transparency, the chairman announced. Justice Alito has agreed to take questions in the spirit of cooperation and constitutional accountability. Alito gave a shallow nod, less out of respect, more out of necessity. The early rounds were soft, procedural. Representatives asked about standard disclosures, court processes, outside engagements. Alito offered clipped, dry answers, each one dipped in legalese and served with a side of smug indifference. He'd done this before. He knew how to sidestep without seeming evasive. And then, her name was called. Crockett adjusted her mic, smoothed out her notes, and leaned in. Voice steady, words crisp. "Justice Alito," she began, "you've often spoken about the virtues of judicial restraint and neutrality. But many legal scholars and ordinary citizens alike have raised concerns about inconsistencies in your decisions and public remarks. Let's walk through a few of those." Alito didn't even try to hide the smirk. "Congresswoman Crockett," he said patronizingly, "if this is going to be a lecture, I hope it's at least more original than the last dozen I've heard." A few staffers chuckled under their breath. Crockett didn't even blink. "Don't worry, Justice. You haven't heard this one before." The temperature in the room shifted. One of Alito's aides stiffened in his seat. The press pool leaned in. She went on. "Let's begin with your July opinion on campaign finance. You relied heavily on Buckley versus Vallejo, but curiously, you dismissed it entirely in a previous ruling just months earlier. Can you explain that discrepancy?" Alito leaned back, slightly annoyed. "I don't recall the specifics, but judicial decisions require nuance, something I'm sure you appreciate." There it was. The condescension. The tone that says, "You don't belong here." But Crockett wasn't biting. She flipped a page. "Page 17, line 4, she said. "You cited Buckley as controlling precedent in support of your majority opinion. But during Hancock versus Rhodes, you stated that same precedent had no bearing. Did your interpretation change in 6 months?" The chairman motioned to let Alito respond. He adjusted his glasses, clearly rattled. "Congresswoman, judicial interpretation evolves with context." Crockett finally looked up. Calm, direct, or with convenience? Silence. But it was only the beginning. Alito tried to regain control. You might want to stick to questions you actually understand, Congresswoman. This isn't a city council meeting in East Texas. A murmur rippled through the room. Someone near the back whispered, "Wow." One or two aides looked down, unsure whether to laugh or hide. But Crockett? Still steady. "Justice Alito, I'm going to give you one opportunity to walk that back, because I plan to spend the next 7 minutes discussing law. But if you want to talk credentials and tone, we can absolutely make that time." Alito scoffed. "You brought me here to discuss legal precedent, not lecture me on decorum. If you want Judicial Ethics 101, try reading the Constitution instead of cable news." She didn't sigh. She just paused, the kind of pause that says, "I've been here before. I know exactly what I'm doing." June 8, 2022, she said, holding up a transcript. "You delivered the keynote at the Antonin Scalia Freedom Dinner. In that speech you said, 'This country is in trouble because elected officials don't understand the role of the courts.' Were you referring to Congress?" Alito shifted. "Taken out of context," he muttered. "I've got the full recording," she replied. "When asked about the current Congress, you said, quote, 'They don't understand restraint. They've never read Federalist 78. That's a direct quote. Still out of context? No answer. And at the Heritage Foundation, you stated some judges have no choice but to save the nation from legislative recklessness. Was that a personal mission? Or a judicial one?" Another beat of silence. "Let's talk disclosures," Crockett continued. "You never reported the sponsors of those dinners. Why not?" "They were personal engagements, not subject to mandatory disclosure, but attended by individuals whose organizations filed amicus briefs in your court. And in 2021, you took a private jet to a fishing trip funded by a billionaire whose foundation filed a brief in Chambers versus Turner. You didn't recuse." "There was no legal requirement," Alito answered tightly. "But there was an ethical one," Crockett replied. That line landed like a hammer. "You sit on the highest court in the land," she said. "You don't just interpret the law, you represent it. If you treat ethical standards as optional, why should anyone believe your rulings are above bias?" Alito was silent. He couldn't pivot. Not this time. But she wasn't finished. "Let's talk about Hastings versus Roe. In your opinion, you claimed voting policy changes in Mississippi had no measurable impact, but two lower courts and the Brennan Center presented data showing a 14% drop in early voting access for black voters. Did you review that evidence?" He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "And it's not an isolated case," Crockett continued. "In Bennett versus Texas, Klein versus Dobbs, Reed versus Jones, each time your opinions minimized or ignored the role of race, despite it being central to the plaintiff's case. The room was still. No paper rustling, no typing. Just focus. I've read your rulings, your dissents, even your footnotes," Crockett said. "And there's a pattern. Subtle, consistent avoidance of accountability, whether ethical, procedural, or societal." Alito finally tried to push back. "The Constitution requires impartiality, not political pandering." Crockett didn't blink. "And yet you accept trips, gifts, and platforms from groups with clear political agendas. Groups that show up as amici in your courtroom. You say you're impartial, but the evidence says otherwise." She pulled out a thick envelope and slid it across the desk. "These are your travel records, matched with campaign finance logs. Dozens of undisclosed connections." Alito's jaw clenched. "Those allegations are recycled and irrelevant. To you, maybe," she said, "but to every American waiting for a court date. To every student whose future depends on a ruling. To every person who can't afford a lawyer, let alone a lobbyist. This matters." And then came the final blow. She opened a blue folder, stamped, "Confidential, redacted for committee use. This memo was submitted by your office to the Judicial Conference in 2021. In it, under your own initials, you wrote that the plaintiff's coercion claims in Klein versus Dobbs were, quote, politically motivated and likely exaggerated. You wrote that. Before oral arguments began, Alito turned to his aide again. It was brief, but unmistakable. She'd cornered him, not with noise, not with rage, but with facts. Calm, relentless, irrefutable. And all he could do was sit there. He raised his hand just slightly, measured, rehearsed. That document was never finalized, Justice Alito said, voice clipped. But it was circulated, Crockett answered, unflinching. And it reveals prejudgment. That's a violation of Canon 3 of the Judicial Code of Conduct. Impartiality isn't just about decisions. It's about the appearance of fairness, too. His voice rose then, sharp for the first time. This is a political ambush. Crockett didn't even blink. No, sir, this is what accountability looks like. And then she held it up. A printed email, clear as glass. This internal message from your former clerk confirms the memo was reviewed by at least 3 other chambers before oral arguments began. The temperature in the room shifted. Committee members who had, until then, worn neutrality like armor began to lean forward. Discomfort sat thick in the air. Alito's jaw tightened. Clerks discuss theories all the time. That doesn't amount to bias. Crockett's voice dropped just a note. Lower, colder. It does when the memo references the political affiliations of plaintiffs. When your private notes describe one of the attorneys as a, quote, well-known activist masquerading as counsel. Gasps. Real ones this time. The kind that ripple across a room when truth arrives too loudly to ignore. A camera shutter clicked. Twice. Alito opened his mouth but didn't speak. Then, almost defiantly, he said, You've clearly done your homework, but I'm under no obligation to respond to cherry-picked phrases from internal deliberations. She tilted her head. So you don't deny writing it? He said nothing. Crockett leaned back, folded her arms, looked around the room. Calm, grounded. I'd like this entered into the record, she said to the chair. The memo, the email chain, the public timeline of your comments versus your private behavior. Because this is no longer about opinions. This is about conduct. The chair nodded. So, ordered, came the reply. Then she turned back to Alito. Let me ask you something, Justice. Do you think public trust in the Supreme Court is stronger today than it was 5 years ago? He hesitated. That's not for me to decide. But you contribute to that trust, she replied. With every ruling, every decision not to recuse, every donor-funded dinner you attend, every offhand comment suggesting that some Americans matter more than others. She leaned in now, the tone sharper, the point no longer rhetorical. Do you honestly believe you've upheld the standard that your robe demands? No answer. Just a shift. A reach for the water glass. His hands, slightly unsteady now. I will not sit here and be accused of corruption, he muttered. No one said corruption, Crockett said, without missing a beat. But if that's what you heard, maybe ask yourself why. It landed hard, like a gavel that didn't need to fall. The silence that followed wasn't shock. It was recognition, and everyone watching knew it. But Crockett didn't pause for applause. She hadn't come for headlines. What came next wasn't strategy. It was something deeper, personal. She opened the last section of her binder. No exhibits, no legal references. Just a single laminated photo, clipped neatly to the page. This is my father, she said, holding it up. His name was Bernard Crockett. He served as a district judge in Smith County for nearly 2 decades. Her voice didn't change. It didn't need to. He worked 5 days a week. Every other Saturday, too. Wore the same suit until it frayed. At the seams. She locked eyes with Alito. You know what he used to say before every exam I took in school? He'd say, You don't have to be louder. You just have to be ready. Alito blinked slowly. Still no words. He spent his life believing in this system, she continued. He believed it could protect the vulnerable and hold the reckless accountable. But near the end of his career, he told me something. He said, "It's not the law that's broken, Jazz. It's the people trusted to keep it honest." Her hand was still on the photo. That was the day I decided to run for office. A cough from the gallery. A pen dropped, rolled, and no one moved to retrieve it. "You sit on the highest court in the land," she said, voice quiet now. "And yet you act like answering to the people is beneath you, like ethics are optional, like your legacy is something owed, not earned." He inhaled, shallow. No rebuttal. Just the sound of a man running out of space to hide. She slid another document forward. "This is your itinerary from June 2023. It shows you attended a private dinner hosted by American Freedom Coalition donors, the same group that submitted amicus briefs in Bennett versus Texas. The court released its decision the very next morning. You authored the majority opinion." He turned to his aide. But she didn't meet his eyes. "No disclosure. No recusal," Crockett said. "Just business, as usual." Alito exhaled through his nose. His face said what his words wouldn't. He was done. "I'd like to remind you," she added, "that trust in the Supreme Court is at its lowest level since Gallup began polling. And every unanswered question chips away at what little remains." His hand reached for the mic, paused, hovered, then dropped. "I'm going to request a brief recess," he said quietly. The chair looked at him, puzzled. "Justice Alito, you still have time to respond." "I understand," Alito replied, standing slowly. "But I won't continue under these conditions." He didn't look at her. He didn't take his papers. He just walked out. Not in anger, not in defiance, but like a man who wasn't running, just no longer standing tall. The door closed behind him with a soft, final click. No one moved. "We'll take a 10-minute recess," the chair said into the mic. Crockett sat back, closed her folder, and didn't smile. She didn't need to. She had brought questions, not accusations. Proof, not speculation. And she asked them the way justice is supposed to be asked, calmly, firmly, and without apology. But outside that chamber, the world was already buzzing. The hallway filled with reporters, cameras clustered like satellites, everyone waiting for the door that never reopened. Not after 10 minutes, not after 20. Inside, committee members still sat in stunned silence, some whispering, others staring at notes like they'd just learned to read them. No one expected it to go that way. Not even her. Crockett flipped through her binder again. Methodical, like it was just another workday. Mark Ellison leaned over from 2 seats away. "He's not coming back," he whispered. Crockett didn't even look up. Didn't think he would. Outside, anchors were live. Headlines rolled in. Justice Samuel Alito walks out mid-hearing after explosive ethics challenge from Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Clips went viral. One line in particular, "You're not standing, Justice. You're sitting." It played everywhere. Television panels, TikTok, podcasts dissecting it like closing arguments in a national trial. Inside, the hearing resumed. "We'll continue with the remaining agenda," the chair said, then nodded at Crockett. "Congresswoman, thank you for your preparation." She closed her binder, and for the first time that day, let herself breathe. That evening, just outside the Capitol, a few reporters caught her as she walked to her car. "Congresswoman Crockett, did you expect him to walk out?" She stopped. "Considered. I expected him to answer," she said. "Do you think there'll be consequences?" "That's not up to me," she replied. "But the American people are watching. And sometimes, that's how change starts." Back in her office, the emails flooded in. Gratitude, outrage, surprise. Most weren't shocked by what she exposed, but by how she did it. No theatrics, no shouting. Just facts. A Rutgers law professor wrote, "You restored my faith in congressional oversight." A public defender from Arkansas. "My daughter watched the whole thing. She wants to be a lawyer now." Even some of her colleagues, ones who once dismissed her, came by to say, "That was something." She didn't let it distract her. She kept working, because for her, this wasn't about viral clips or evening headlines. It was about asking the questions regular people ask when they feel invisible. About fairness, about power, about whether the rules are real or just for the rest of us. Justice Alito never returned that day. In the weeks that followed, his office released a single statement, a vague affirmation of respecting the process. No apology, no admission, just silence. But silence speaks. And Crockett wasn't finished. 2 days later, in her district office in Dallas, she sat in front of a plain backdrop. No flag, no podium, just a camera, a staffer, the hum of traffic outside. She looked into the lens and said, "Let's talk." Not as a congresswoman, just as someone who was raised to believe the law was supposed to treat everyone the same. No script, no pin on her blazer, no pretense. Maybe you watched the hearing. Maybe you saw the clips. Maybe not. But this was never about taking someone down. It was about asking questions, the kind any American should be able to ask when things don't feel right. She paused. "My first job out of law school? I defended people who couldn't afford a lawyer. People treated like they didn't matter. And I learned something. Justice isn't blind. It just turns its head when it's uncomfortable." Then, she held up a worn card. My father's bench card. He kept this in his pocket every day he wore the robe. It read, "Dignity costs nothing, but once lost, it can bankrupt a man." Her voice softened. He believed in being prepared, in speaking only when it mattered. "That's what I tried to do, and I'll keep doing it, whether anyone walks out or not." She stood, not to end the recording, but to send a message. To every young person told to stay in their lane. Don't. She picked up the binder from the hearing. Learn your facts, ask your questions, hold people accountable, and do it without shouting. Because the loudest room isn't the one with the most noise. It's the one with the most truth. One last look to the camera. If that hearing made you feel something, pride, anger, resolve, don't let it fade. Channel it. Read more. Vote wiser. A flicker of a smile. And subscribe if you want more stories that don't just make noise. They make change. Fade to black, because this wasn't Jasmine Crockett versus Justice Alito. This was about something bigger. The radical idea that truth, spoken clearly and without apology, still matters. Even in the highest rooms of power.